So when they catch him out, we'll be afraid.
Do this without knowing a person, and you can be so evil knowing a person, not knowing a person, and you want to do this. That's sad to be so evil.
Daughters who are driving now, and I'm afraid for them. You know, I tell them to lock their doors when they get in the car. I don't want them walking alone at night.
Most of the problem started when he was around 10. It started him being a peeping Tom, leading to videotaping people and leading to breaking and entry. We never knew that he was going to commit murder.
Courtney Hicks came home just after 10 at night. The lights were on. Her sister's jacket was hanging by the door, exactly where it always was. Her mother's car sat in the driveway. Everything looked normal. The kind of normal you don't think twice about until you call out and nobody answers. She checked every room. Nothing. She called both their phones. Nothing. She told herself there was an explanation. There wasn't. But to understand what Courtney walked into that night, we have to go back 7 weeks, to another house in the same quiet part of Largo, Maryland. Largo isn't the kind of place you'd expect to end up in a story like this. Trimmed lawns, quiet cul-de-sacs, neighbors who know each other by name. The kind of neighborhood where people leave their porch lights on out of habit, not fear. Karen Lofton was 45, a school nurse, the kind of mother who locked her doors and set her alarm without fail. Her daughter Karissa was 16, smart, private school, working part-time at a Golden Corral to save up her own money. On Sunday, January 25th, they went to church together. That evening, Karissa clocked in for her shift. She was last seen leaving around 9 p.m. What happened between her leaving work and arriving home, no one has ever been able to say for certain. At 2:30 in the morning, a 911 dispatcher picked up a call. On the other end was Karissa, barely audible. She said she and her mother had been shot. She was whispering, not because she was too weak to speak louder, but because she thought the person who did this might still be in the house with her. Police arrived in under 5 minutes. The front door was locked. No broken glass, no sign anyone had forced their way in. One officer noticed a side window, closed but unlocked. He climbed through with his gun drawn and let the others in. They found Karen upstairs, crouched in the corner of her bedroom. She'd tried to shield herself. Karissa was found in her bed, still under the covers. No robbery, nothing missing, no struggle. The home's alarm had been armed that night, and then switched off. Someone had gotten in and out of a locked house, past an active alarm system, without leaving a single mark behind. That's not luck. That takes knowledge. Of the house, of the routine, maybe of the family itself. Detectives started where they usually start, the people closest to the victims. Karen's ex-husband was in Atlanta the night of the murders. He was cleared quickly. Her son, Keon, was at his fiancé's house. His alibi held up too. Friends, extended family, anyone with a reason to be in that house, all questioned, all cleared. Weeks passed. No suspect, no motive. Just a mother and daughter shot in their own home, and a neighborhood that suddenly didn't feel as safe as it used to. Then, 7 weeks later, it happened again. In the early hours of March 16th, a car fire lit up the driveway of an empty house on Webwood Court, a few blocks from where Karen and Karissa had been killed. The fire was so intense it melted the asphalt underneath it. Inside the car, firefighters found 2 bodies. One in the back seat, one in the trunk, burned too badly to identify. The car had been reported stolen from a nearby home just hours earlier. And across town, Courtney Hicks was standing in an empty house, calling her mother's name into a silence that wasn't going to answer back. By Tuesday, the medical examiner had a name for the 2 bodies in that car. Delores DeWitt, 42, a nurse, and her daughter Ebony, 20. 2 mothers, 2 daughters. Both nurses' families. Both killed in the same stretch of quiet Largo streets, in the early hours of a Monday, 7 weeks apart. No forced entry either time, no robbery, no obvious link between the 2 households, beyond a few blocks of shared geography and the 2 words that were starting to hang over both cases: no motive. The people investigating this weren't dealing with two isolated tragedies anymore. They were dealing with a pattern, and they had no idea yet how far it went. Police still weren't ready to call it what it looked like. Major Andy Ellis, standing in front of reporters, chose his words carefully. "We have not definitively linked these cases," he said. "They have very uncanny resemblances to each other. Close in time, close in distance, mothers and daughters, strong circumstantial links, but nothing definitive, not yet." Behind the scenes, that caution was starting to crack. Detectives went back. Through the timeline of the night, Delores and Ebony died, and the details didn't add up cleanly. Ebony's boyfriend told police he'd dropped her off at home around 1:30 that Sunday morning. Hours later, Courtney found the house empty. Somewhere in that gap, Delores and Ebony disappeared, and nobody could say exactly when or how. Then there was the car. A woman named Sybil Felton lived a few blocks away. Early that same morning, she and her boyfriend stepped out to run an errand. When they got back, her Nissan Maxima was gone from the driveway. Investigators believe it had been stolen using a key taken during a burglary at her home weeks earlier. As Felton was on the phone with a 911 operator reporting the car missing, she suddenly screamed and hung up. She'd just watched her own stolen car speed past her. 6 minutes later, less than 3 blocks from where she was standing, someone reported a car on fire in an empty driveway. That was Felton's Maxima. That was Delores and Ebony inside. Whoever did this stole a car, killed 2 people, drove that car back into the neighborhood, doused it in accelerant, and disappeared into the dark, all in a matter of minutes on a dead-end street without a single witness. Detectives would later call this one of the most confounding parts of the entire case. It wasn't luck, it was planning. And the neighborhood had context for that kind of planning. A woman living across the street from the DeWitts told reporters her own home had been burglarized months earlier, right after she and her family bought a new TV and a Wii. Someone had been watching. As it turned out, there'd been around 40 burglaries in that part of Largo since the previous October. Somebody knew these streets, these houses, and what was inside them, far better than a stranger passing through ever could. Police assigned more than 24 investigators to the 2 cases. They collected over 200 pieces of evidence. They brought in the FBI to build a profile. They went door to door, asked for DNA samples, chased every burglary report from the past year. And still, nothing that pointed to a name. For months, that's where it stayed. 2 families gutted, a neighborhood locking its doors earlier and earlier, and a killer who hadn't left behind anything to find. The break, when it came, had nothing to do with either murder. In May of 2009, a gun shop in Woodbine, Maryland was broken into. Several firearms were stolen. Because it involved federal weapons charges, the ATF took over, and an informant gave them a name, Jason Thomas Scott, 27 years old, a part-time UPS worker who'd been quietly clocking in for almost a decade. Nobody's idea of a suspect. Agents searched his home in Upper Marlboro, where he still lived with his parents and sister. What they found went far beyond stolen guns. A dozen firearms, a police scanner, a silencer, a bulletproof vest, burglary tools, a crowbar, gloves, a ski mask, items that matched descriptions from burglaries in the exact neighborhoods where Karen and Karissa and Delores and Ebony had lived. Then they found the flash drive. On it were photographs of a young woman, her face covered by a pillowcase. The images matched a home invasion from weeks earlier in Fort Washington, where a man had held a teenage girl at gunpoint, forced her older sister into a bedroom, and assaulted her. Investigators believed that man was Jason Scott. He was arrested in July 2009, picked up in a UPS parking lot like it was any other afternoon. Carjacking, weapons charges, sexual assault. He pleaded not guilty and was scheduled for federal trial the following year. He never walked free again. While Scott sat in custody on those charges, Prince George's County detectives quietly started building something bigger. What they were learning about him didn't fit the profile of the average burglar. Scott held 2 master's degrees, one in information systems management. He'd studied forensic science, read the same textbooks investigators use to catch people like him. By day, he was correcting shipping labels at a UPS sorting facility. Reliable, quiet, the kind of coworker nobody remembers much about. By night, police believe he was using his own skills against the people trying to stop him, researching investigative procedure, tracking how forensic evidence gets left behind, and, they suspect, using his access to delivery databases to learn who lived where and what they had worth taking. He thought he'd covered every angle. He read the textbooks, he studied the process, he even managed to complicate the FBI's own profile of him. And in the end, none of it mattered. Because he got caught the same way most careless criminals do. Not through brilliance. Through a gun store robbery 2 counties away from either murder scene. An accomplice who'd worked burglaries with Scott gave detectives more. A string of home invasions going back to 2007 and 2008, more violent and more extensive than anyone had first realized. The police chief who'd once ruled out a serial killer now had a different answer. He called Jason Scott exactly that. Investigators believed Scott might be tied to at least one more murder. A woman named Vilma Artis Butler, shot in her Bowie home in 2008, her house also set on fire. Possible connections stretched as far as D.C., Texas, and Florida. On July 27, 2010, a grand jury indicted Jason Scott on 7 counts, including 2 counts of murder, for Delores and Ebony DeWitt. If convicted, he faced 2 life sentences. He had never been charged for Karen and Karissa. In 2012, Jason Scott stood trial in federal court, not for murder, but for the weapons, the burglaries, the sexual assault. The evidence was overwhelming. He was convicted and sentenced to 100 years in prison. The murder charges were still waiting for him at the state level. By 2013, with witnesses lined up and the evidence stacked against him, Scott entered what's called an Alford plea. It's a strange kind of admission. He agreed the state had enough evidence to convict him without ever actually saying he did it. In exchange, he avoided a trial. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without parole for the murders of Delores and Ebony DeWitt, and the charges tied to Karen and Karissa Lofton and to Vilma Artis Butler were dropped. He studied forensic textbooks. He researched how investigators build a case. And when it finally came down to it, he found a legal shortcut that let him walk away without ever having to say her name, or Karen's or Karissa's, in a courtroom. Not exactly the calculated genius he seemed to think he was. Just a man who found the one exit that let him avoid saying what he'd done. Jason Scott is still behind bars. He's never been charged with killing Karen and Karissa Lofton. He's never been charged with killing Vilma Artis Butler. As far as the law is concerned, those cases remain open. No motive was ever established, not for the DeWitts, not for the Loftons. Investigators believe Scott didn't know his victims personally, that he chose them the way he chose which houses to burglarize, watching, learning routines, picking his moment. 2 mothers, 2 daughters, killed for reasons that even now no one can fully explain. That's the part of this case that never resolves. Not the arrest, not the sentence. The silence where a motive should be. Karen Lofton set her alarm every night. Karissa was saving up her own money at 16. Delores spent her career caring for the elderly. Ebony was the kind of person who made a room feel lighter just by being in it. None of them were living dangerous lives. None of them saw this coming. They were simply home. Jason Scott will die in prison. That much, at least, is certain. But certainty isn't the same as justice. Not when 2 of the 4 people he's believed to have killed never got their day in court, never had their names read aloud as part of a verdict. So this is where we say them instead. Karen Lofton, Karissa Lofton, Delores DeWitt, Ebony DeWitt, 4 lives, taken in the place they should have been safest, not forgotten, not unaccounted for, just remembered here the way they deserved to be remembered all along. Fair use notice. This video is for educational and commentary purposes only. All footage and images used fall under fair use guidelines as protected under Section 107 of the U.S. Copyright Act. If you enjoy true crime content, make sure to subscribe to Love to Death channel for more shocking cases, in-depth investigations, and updates on stories like this one. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload.